Greetings. I'm Michael Liccardi at the Brazelton Touchpoint Center, welcoming you to More Than Just My Vote, a special offering of our Learning to Advocate for Children and Families series. We're excited you're joining us today. As we begin, please share in the chat who you are and where you're from. Our colleague, Catriona Macdonald, founder of Linchpin Strategies, will be hosting today's session, which will last for 1 hour and be recorded for later viewing. The series is made possible by the generosity of donors and individual contributors. If you can make a gift, that would be great. It helps us make all of this great programming possible. I wanted to recognize my colleague, Maria Jose Gutierrez, who will be simultaneously translating our webinar into Spanish. Thank you, Maria Jose. To access the translation, click on the interpretation icon in your Zoom controls. Then select Spanish and mute the English in the background by selecting Mute Original Audio. Closed captions are available by clicking on the closed caption icon in your Zoom controls and selecting Show Subtitle, the size of which you can adjust. This series seeks to cultivate dialogue through engaging conversation. So the use of chatbots and other AI tools is prohibited during these webinars. And in addition to closed captioning and Spanish translation, transcriptions will be available following each webinar to further enhance access. For issues hearing the webinar, please check your audio settings in Zoom or call in to today's session by selecting phone audio and following the instructions from there. I will be monitoring the chat, so please feel free to share your comments and thoughts as we learn together. For questions for our presenter, Cat Macdonald, please use the Q&A feature in your Zoom controls. And we love to hear our participants' feedback, so please complete our feedback survey, either when it opens at the end of today's session or through the link you'll receive with the recording in the email. Certificates of attendance are available to download once you have submitted a survey. The survey and webinar recording will be available in both English and Spanish, and you will be able to view the recording on our YouTube channel or our website. From past seasons of our Learning to Advocate series, we created and offer an advocacy reference guide that's available in both English and Spanish. You can download it through the QR code or the links in the follow-up thank you email. And then finally, before we begin, I want to thank my colleague Isabella Mantilla Silverman for her production and logistical support. And now I'd like to introduce Cat Macdonald, a colleague, friend, changemaker, and policy advocate. Cat is the president of Linchpin Strategies, where she has led successful efforts to establish new medical research funds, protect small business opportunities from federal agency overreach and multi-million-dollar competitors, and secure increases of more than $4 billion for early childhood education. Her experience on Capitol Hill includes working for Senator Ted Kennedy on the Senate Labor Committee, staffing domestic social issues and appropriations for Congressman Steny Hoyer, and serving as the legislative director for Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, the ranking member of the House Appropriations Committee. Cat, it is a pleasure to have you with us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Michael, thank you so much for that generous introduction, and thank you to everyone on the Touchpoints team for your help in making this webinar happen. It's really exciting for me to join all of you and wonderful to see so many folks from across the country. Welcome. So if this is the first time that you have joined one of our webinars, our advocacy webinars, thank you. We're delighted to have you. And if you have joined us before, welcome back. We're excited to have you for this conversation as well. Isabella, if you could take us to the next slide. If you've joined us before for these advocacy webinars, you have seen this picture and this quote before. It is one of my very favorites. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And this webinar and this series is about changing the world. If you've joined us before for these conversations, you also know that my first job out of college was working as a junior high school civics teacher. And so I want to say right up front, I have very strong personal feelings about candidates and about policy issues, but my very strongest feelings are that regardless of what candidate you are supporting or what issue you are working on, the most important priority is for citizens in a democracy to engage in the political process. And some would argue, and I would agree, even for non-citizens to participate as well, because people who have not yet gotten their citizenship and are not allowed to vote can also work on campaigns and issues and help to change the direction of our country and the world. I would also like to briefly say for our international guests, we are delighted to have you here. I am not an expert in the political process outside the United States. We certainly hope that what we share today is useful to you. But please, we would invite you to put comments, invite all of you to put comments in the chat. If you've got ideas and suggestions, we want to hear them and we want to learn from you. So with no further ado, we're going to start by talking briefly about why it is important to vote. And I'm going to assume that because you are on this webinar, you think that voting is important, but sometimes it's helpful to just have a few facts and examples at your fingertips in case you need to persuade somebody else. But then we're going to talk about what else you can do in a campaign season and beyond to help influence the outcome of the decisions that we're going to be making this fall. We will start with the simplest, sort of lowest level of effort activities that you can do if you don't have a lot of time and a lot of energy, but then we will go on and talk about activities that are increasingly more complicated in case some of you have the motivation, the time, and the energy to go even further beyond. So let's dive right in. Voters often ask, does voting really make a difference? And you will not be surprised that my answer to that is absolutely yes. Many of the examples that people use about the outcome of elections turning on a small handful of votes are long ago, maybe even from the 1800s. So let's talk about some recent examples where a very small number of votes made a really big difference. If we think about presidential elections, many people have heard the statistic that if 30,000 votes in 3 or 4 key congressional districts had changed, the outcome of the 2016 presidential election would have been different. 30,000 votes is not a lot in the scheme of the millions of votes that millions of votes that are cast in a presidential election, but it still feels like a lot if you're thinking about I'm one person with one vote. So let's talk about some recent elections where a really small handful of people made a huge difference. In 2010, in the Massachusetts House of Representatives, Peter Durant was initially declared the winner, and a judge ruled that a discarded ballot should be counted, which resulted in a tie, and then a special election was held 6 months later with a 56-vote margin that decided who went to the Massachusetts House of Representatives. In Iowa, with the US House of Representatives vote, we can go to the next slide. In 2020, Marionette Miller Meeks beat Rita Hart by 6 votes across an entire congressional district. And actually, this week in Arizona, there was a Democratic primary in a Democratic-leaning district. Yasemin Ansari won by 39 votes after a recount. And because that's a Democratic-leaning district, those 39 votes probably decided who will be coming to Washington, D.C. to represent that district in Arizona. So you might be thinking, okay, Catriona, great, but does it really matter? I mean, elections to the House of Representatives are fine, but there's still only one out of 435 representatives. And I have to say, again, my answer is absolutely yes, because I've seen what one person working in the House of Representatives or the United States Senate can do. But congressional elections and presidential elections are absolutely not the only elections that matter. In my own state of Virginia in 2017, an initial ballot count showed that David Yancey was ahead of Shelley Simons by 13 votes. There was a recount, and the count flipped by 1 vote out of 23,000. After the panel reviewed the ballot that had been thrown out, they declared a tie. And according to the state of Virginia, when that happens, they literally put both names into a hat and pull one out. This was particularly important because this race, this decision, gave Republicans control of the Virginia House of Delegates by a 51-49 vote. And had the race gone the other way, a 50-50 split between Republicans and Democrats in the House of Delegates would have been declared, and a power sharing agreement would have had to be negotiated. Absent that power sharing negotiation, the shape of legislation that went through the Virginia House of Delegates was fundamentally different. Another example from the state of Alaska, their House of Representatives in 2006, there was a disagreement over 5 ballots that was literally decided by the court in a coin toss, making one of the candidates the winner of the Democratic primary. This, because he won the primary and went on to win the general election, he became Speaker of the Alaska House of Representatives. Why does that matter? Well, the Speaker controls what legislation gets to come to the floor for a vote. If you can't get your bill to the floor for a vote, you can't make it, turn it into law. The Speaker also controls who sits on the committees that write the legislation. So that role as Speaker is critically important. And those 5 ballots made a difference. Even more recently, an example from a local election in Caddo Parish, Louisiana, where one candidate beat the other in a runoff election for sheriff in the parish that includes Shreveport, and again, won by 2 votes. Why does this matter? Well, the big issue in this election was Black Lives Matter and policing policies. And Shreveport is a big city with really complicated issues around this, like many other places in the United States. So the outcome of the policing policies rested on those 3 votes that made the decision in this election. Maybe you live in a place where there have been heated elections for school board and issues of book banning or controlling what students learn in classes, or policies about transgender students. All of those things might be up for decisions in your school board election. And the more local the elections are, the fewer people vote, and the more a small handful of votes can really make a difference. Okay, so let's hope you're sold that voting is important. But what if that doesn't feel like enough? So we're going to spend the rest of the webinar talking about ways for engaged citizens to do more. And Isabella, you can take us to the next slide. Thank you. And again, we are going to talk briefly about the simpler things that you can do and then work our way up to more complicated and more time-consuming activities if you've got the energy and the time. So we're headed into campaign season, and you are probably starting to see in your neighborhood yard signs. Campaigns spend a lot of money on mail and television ads and other things that are designed to convince voters to vote for them. But you know what? The number one factor in people's decision to vote or not is knowing that neighbors and friends and family members are voting. If I don't think that anybody I know is going out to vote, I am really unlikely to vote either. But when I know that people around me are voting, I'm much more likely to do that. And putting up yard signs is one way to send a message to people that you're engaged and you're voting. Now, there are a lot of different kinds of yard signs. They might be issue specific, like end the noise, clear the air, remove the clowns from the city council. They might be specific to candidates like Smith and Flora Lee, or they might be just general, don't forget to vote. You can have the broad or the specific yard signs to put on your lawn. You can put them up in a window. There are lots of ways to display that you are engaged and you're going to the polls and you want other people to do that as well. I see there's a question in the chat about what are some of the reasons for voters' apathy. And the research shows that people are apathetic about voting because they don't believe that their vote matters. Either they don't think that their vote is going to change the outcome of an election, or they believe that all the politicians, all the candidates, they're all the same, and it doesn't really matter who they vote for. So part of encouraging people to be engaged is talking with them about votes that do matter and differences between candidates. And certainly in the American presidential election, there are some very clear differences this year between candidates. And again, regardless of which of the presidential candidates you support, it seems like there are some pretty clear differences. And the presidential election is not the only one that matters. So I have to say, I saved the best for last, and Isabella is going to take us to my favorite yard sign: don't just vent, vote. So if you wanted to have yard signs to put in your window or put in your yard, how do you get them? How do you find them? Well, if you wanted a sign that is in support of a particular candidate or a particular issue, you can often get them for free. If you look up on the web the campaign for your issue or your candidate and contact them, they will often give you an address where you can come and pick up signs. And actually, a lot of campaigns, if you give them your address, they'll have somebody deliver signs to you. You might want to get a couple for yourself and maybe even ask for a few more for your neighbor, because they'll often give you extras that you can share around. You can also purchase signs from organizations like the League of Women Voters. Again, just enter them in the search function on your browser. You'll get information to contact them, and you can order them online. So yard signs are one way to influence this. Social media is another. And you can absolutely be an influencer along with this particularly recognizable influencer. You know, Taylor Swift posted an Instagram encouraging her followers to vote, to register to vote, and to be engaged. And she sent them to a website called vote.org, where people can register to vote. Within hours of Taylor Swift putting that Instagram up, vote.org was contacted and registered 35,000 new voters. But you don't have to be a celebrity in order to be an influencer, because again, the most important influence, the most effective influence is contacts and role modeling by friends and by family. So what can you do? You can post messages encouraging people to become informed and to vote. You can share information about the questions that are going to be on the ballot. Just make sure that you are using reputable sources and you are sharing accurate information, because there's a lot of disinformation out there. You can post messages encouraging people to vote, even if you don't take a particular opinion. And in some families where over the last few years in particular, there have been heated divisions over candidates or over issues, maybe you don't want to encourage people on social media to vote for a particular candidate or a particular issue, but you can just encourage them to get out and vote in general. After you vote, you get a sticker that says, "I voted." Why do they hand those out? Well, they're hoping that you're going to go to your workplace or to the grocery store or to your school, and other people are going to see that sticker and be reminded that they should go and vote too. Take a selfie and post it on your social media feeds, on your Facebook page, so that you can proudly tell everyone around you that you voted. And just as an aside, the election and being engaged is really important, but you can continue to engage on issues that of concern to your community well after the election and encourage people to be engaged even after election day. So what if you've got a little more time and you really care passionately about an issue or a candidate that's going to be on the ballot this election day? There's more that you can do. So you might recognize this picture from the Harry Potter movies of Gringotts Bank. Not this kind of bank. We want for election day to be phone banking. Phone banking is when you get a list of people from a campaign or from a candidate, people who tend to vote a particular way. Campaigns will provide lists, and then you phone through the lists. And if people answer the phone, you encourage them to turn out to vote. You ask them if they know where their polling place is. Do they have a plan for election day, or maybe a plan to vote early? You can call people you don't know, and those touches are effective in getting folks to turn out to vote. You can also create your own phone banking list of friends and family that you call or text or email and encourage them to vote. And in case you think that this is not particularly important or effective, the presidential campaigns would beg to differ. So it was recently announced that the Trump campaign is recruiting 10,000 people in key states, and they're asking those 10,000 folks to each contact 10 friends and family members who will turn out to vote for former President Trump in November. On the other side, the Council for Human Needs, which is a liberal advocacy group, has a sign up for people who care about the issues on the ballot to volunteer to each contact 5 friends and family members across the country to turn out to vote. So 5 votes, 10 votes, if we all work together, those votes can have a big impact on the outcome of the election. And the campaigns know that. And so they are spending money to recruit people who will commit to talking to 5 to 10 people that they know about voting in November. Now, if you want to contact folks that you don't know and do traditional phone banking, working through a call list, you used to have to go to campaign headquarters in order to be able to do that. Now you can get a list and you can contact people by calling them or texting them from your own phone, and you can do it at home. You can send postcards and get a list of people to write a postcard to saying, hope that you are planning to vote this November because it's really important. If you wanted to do this, calling, texting, postcarding, how do you do it? How do you figure out who to call and what to say? Again, the internet is your best friend. Go to the website for the campaign that you want to support. The issue or the candidate, or just general get out the vote initiatives. And they will, you can contact them through the website, let them know you want to volunteer, and they will give you everything that you need to do that. Specific work around candidates and issues is really important, but sometimes it's important to just let voters know that the election is happening. We can feel really inundated by the political ads and mailings and feel like, how would it be possible for anyone to not know that there's an election? But there are disenfranchised communities across the United States where people may not know that the election is coming up, or they might not know specifically what day to vote, or they might not know where to go, where their polling place is, or what the hours are that the polling place is open. Maybe they don't plan to vote because they don't know that they can vote early, and they do know that they're going to have to work on election day. So sometimes just getting the vote out, regardless of the particular position, is vitally important. There are 3 websites in particular that are great resources if you want to do work that is just generic, working to get people to the polls. And Isabella, if you could advance the slide, we've got the logos of those 3 websites. So one is vote.org, and their goal is to register voters, in particular young voters. They have been launching an outreach campaign that targets college campuses. And in the last year, they have done outreach, having volunteers go to college campuses, 45 different colleges and universities across the country. And together across those schools, they have registered 1 million students who were not registered before. Pretty amazing. Headcount has been going for 20 years, working to register, again, young people. And it's called Headcount because they started out targeting deadheads that were going to Grateful Dead concerts. Now, if you're on this webinar and you're under 50, you might not know who the Grateful Dead are. Those of us who are fans and a little older certainly hope that you have heard of the Grateful Dead. So Headcount started out recruiting deadheads, excuse me, to vote at Grateful Dead concerts. They have now expanded their reach, and they recruit volunteers to go to concerts and festivals and other cultural events and register voters. If you sign up with Headcount, You would go to events, you would ask people, are you registered to vote? Would you like to be registered to vote? Do you know how to register to vote? And support them in making that happen. And the bonus for volunteers through headcount, you get free attendance at the concert or the festival where you're doing the voting recruitment. That's a similar approach to Rock the Vote, whose goal is to engage young people in elections. The Rock the Vote website allows you to register to vote. It allows you to check to see what your registration status is. Maybe you're not sure if you've registered to vote. Maybe you've moved since the last election and you need to change your registration and you're not sure how to do that. You can also sign up at Rock the Vote to get reminders to vote. Again, if you're living in a world where you feel like you're inundated with all kinds of ads about the election on social media, on TV and cable, it might seem hard to imagine that there are people who might forget to vote. But there actually are a lot of folks who wake up the morning after the election and are chagrined to realize that they didn't make it in time. Okay, so working to get people to the polls is important, and there are multiple organizations that will help you do that. What else can you do to help people get out and be counted? So door knocking is pretty old school, but I have to say it is a classic for a reason. Door knocking is also called canvassing, or you might hear the acronym GOTV, G-O-T-V, get out the vote. Again, you can contact campaigns for lists of addresses in your area and go door to door. If people answer the door, ask them, are you planning on voting? Do you have a plan to vote? Sometimes folks need to kind of think through, what are they going to do? Are they going to go to work, go to vote in the morning before they go to work or to school? Or maybe they're going to plan to vote at the end of the day, in which case they need to know when the polls close. Because if you're not in line by the time the polls close, you won't be able to vote. You ask them, do they know where their polling place is? Do they need information about the candidate? I have to say, this is not my favorite kind of volunteering. I don't really like it when people that I don't know are knocking on my door. It feels a little uncomfortable to have conversations with them. And I would much prefer to volunteer in other ways than to knock at the door. But I have done a lot of door knocking because my experience working for members of Congress has taught me how important this is. And I have to say, even though it is not always comfortable, it is always extremely rewarding. And I have actually taken my daughter knocking on doors with me in a couple of different campaigns, because I figure you really can't ever start them too early. I remember in particular a man who came to the door. He had terrible diabetes and his legs were very swollen and he was having a really hard time walking. But he answered the door and we talked about his plan to vote. And he let me know that he really wanted to vote for the candidate on whose behalf I was knocking on doors, but he didn't have a ride to the polls. And he normally took the bus places, but the bus wouldn't come close enough to his polling place. I was able to work with the campaign to get a volunteer to come and pick him up and take him to the polls. And as a result of that knocking on the door and that conversation, this gentleman who really wanted to vote and would not have had the opportunity to do so we were able to make that happen for him. I also particularly remember another house that I went to, and the door was opened by a woman who did not speak English. And she had her 10 or 11-year-old son come to the door. When I explained to the little boy who did speak English why I was knocking, and he translated for his mom, her whole face lit up. This family had come to the United States about 2 years before, and the mother and the father had just gotten their American citizenship. And they came from a country where they weren't allowed to vote, where democracy, where elections were not free and fair, and there was really no point in voting. And the parents were so excited to vote in their first election in the United States. And the little boy was so excited to be able to help. So we got the information for them about the polling place and the hours of the poll, and the three of them planned to go together to vote for their very first time. It's so exciting. Now, maybe you live in a place where the outcome of the local elections is pretty certain. Again, if you have been on some of these webinars, you know that I live in a district where it is overwhelmingly voters of one party. So a lot of people in my neighborhood don't door knock in my neighborhood. They go to other counties near us where the vote is much more divided, and it feels like the door knocking might make more of a difference. You can even connect with campaigns in other states and volunteer to go to other states to knock on doors. In the region, and again, many of you know I live in Virginia. In Maryland, the state is not universally one party, but many of the elections are a pretty foregone conclusion for one party. And so volunteers, thousands of volunteers from Maryland, go to Pennsylvania and do door knocking in Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania is a pretty purple state, pretty divided politically, and it feels to folks from Maryland that their work will make more of a difference if they're knocking on doors in Pennsylvania. So if you want to do door knocking, how do you get connected? Again, look for a campaign or a candidate online and contact their campaigns. A lot of door knocking is organized either by the Republican or the Democratic Party, the local chapter in your area, and they will have people door knocking and supporting the presidential candidate, the Senate candidate from that party, if there's a senator who is up for election, and also the member from the House of Representatives, because all members of the House of Representatives are up. Okay, so what if you understand door knocking is important, but you don't feel comfortable doing that? Well, there's actually a lot of support that is needed for the folks who are doing that door knocking. Campaigns need to print lists of the voters that they think are going to be voting for them, that they want to do turnout for. They need to put together packages of information for voters. That might be information that the door knockers give to voters to help them decide how to vote, or it might be door hangers that they leave on the doorknob if nobody answers the door. They need to organize clipboards and pens that volunteers can use. All of that equipment, all those supplies need to be delivered and dropped off in neighborhoods where door knockers can pick them up and start walking. Work is needed to recruit door knockers. Businesses and individuals in homes need to be recruited to serve as pickup points for the people who are going to knock at the doors. Often those pickup points have bottles of water, because if it's hot, door knocking can be thirsty work. A few snacks are helpful because folks are going to go out and sometimes for a couple of hours knocking on doors. Then they might come back, turn in the information they've gathered, get another list, and go out again. What if you want to go further, not just putting together information and dropping off supplies? You could volunteer to host a pickup location for your neighborhood. That pickup location could be an apartment lobby. It can be a garage with your garage door open. It could be your living room. Volunteers would come and staff the pickup location, preparing materials and handing them out. And people who are doing door knocking can come to the pickup location to get the things they need before they set out along their path. If you want to do that, again, contacting a campaign, usually they're organized through the local Democratic or Republican Party. They're the folks to contact. And just one aside, if you are in an apartment building and you want to volunteer your apartment building lobby, check with the building management to make sure that that is okay. If you live in a neighborhood with a homeowner association, you might want to check and make sure that that it's not against the rules to have people coming to your house to pick up campaign materials. What else is out there? Well, do you have to work on election day? If not, you could be somebody who helps drive people to the polls. There are lots of different organizations that organize rides, collecting information about who needs the rides and matching those people to folks who are willing to drive them. Again, frequently the folks who organize that are the local Republican or Democratic Party. Ride Share to Vote is an organization that both recruits drivers and then matches them to the local area that the volunteers live in. If you contact Ride Share to Vote, you can indicate that you want to drive Democratic voters to the polls. You can indicate that you want to drive Republican voters to the polls, or you can say that you don't care what kind of voter it is, you just want to help people vote. Other community groups in your neighborhood may be organizing voting rides for voters, including senior centers and churches. And social media is a good place to identify who in your area is doing that kind of work. Okay, so maybe you are willing to do all of this, but it still doesn't feel like quite enough. You can organize a candidate forum. You can invite candidates, either candidates that you support, or maybe both candidates in an election, or maybe both sides of an issue that's on the ballot. Invite them to come to a school, a church, a synagogue, another kind of community center, and host candidates and folks talking about the issues to explain their positions and make their case to other folks in the neighborhood. Nonprofit Vote is a website that has a guide online to hosting nonpartisan candidate forums. If you are working with a nonprofit, you should keep in mind that it is a violation of the rules for nonprofits to endorse a particular candidate. And so if your nonprofit is hosting candidates, you typically want to invite people on both sides of the election. Nonprofit Vote also has information about hosting a pre-election party with a purpose. And if you are hosting something in your home, you can just invite the candidates or the representatives of the side of an issue that you care about. You don't have to be giving everyone equal airtime. There are a lot of events, excuse me, and candidates receive a lot of invitations to come and speak to different groups in the run-up to the election. And they are not able to accept all of those invitations. Excuse me. So I'm going to get a drink while we go to the next slide. So if you've got the time and the interest, and you don't mind getting up and speaking in front of groups of people, you can volunteer to be a surrogate. So when the candidate is not able to go to a school or a community center and talk about why they deserve votes, the campaign will often ask somebody else to go and speak on behalf of the candidate. And issue campaigns need help with speakers as well. So if you feel very passionately about an issue or about a particular candidate, and you have really studied up and you feel confident that you can make the case and answer questions, you might be designated by a campaign to speak on behalf of the candidate or to make the case for the issue. Again, the best way to do this is to contact the campaign that you care about, whether it's for an individual or an issue, and go and sit down with them, talk with them about your knowledge and your availability, and they might ask you to go out and represent the candidate or the issue in that way. Another really important area where we need volunteers right now is working the polls. This is an absolutely nonpartisan role. You cannot go and be a poll worker and be advocating for a particular candidate or a particular issue. The role of the poll workers is to run a free and fair election. But if you have time to do some training, and if you can be available on election day to work the polls, there is a big shortage of poll workers right now because many of the people who've traditionally done this are aging out of their ability to come and work the polls on election day. And we desperately need to train and engage new poll workers. This is an interesting potential opportunity if you have an older teenager in your life who is not yet old enough to vote, but who cares a lot about elections. In many jurisdictions, 16 and 17-year-olds who are not yet eligible to vote can be trained as a poll worker and can go to the polls on election day and do work, including checking IDs and making sure that people are registered at that polling place. If you are interested in being a poll worker, or you know somebody who might be interested, you can do a Google search for the Election Commission in your area, or you can go to the National Election Assistance Commission and get information about who to contact. The training is typically done on weekends, and then obviously the poll work is done on election day. In many places that use schools as polling places, 16 and 17-year-olds have the day off school. And so this is a really exciting way to engage folks who are not yet eligible to vote in supporting elections. So now I have a question for you. What is your big idea about engaging people in the upcoming election? And helping to influence the outcome of the election, because all of us can do the things that I have talked about, or maybe you've got additional ideas. So, for example, I said that my first job out of college, I was a civic education teacher for 7th and 8th graders. And the year that I was teaching, we had a national election. I was teaching in California, which has a lot of propositions on the ballot. And that direct democracy technique of putting propositions on the ballot for voters to decide is an exciting one, but it means that voters have to study up on a lot of different issues. And in the year that I was teaching, there were a lot of ballot initiatives, and voters were overwhelmed, and people were not going to the polls because there were too many questions on the ballot and they didn't feel qualified to vote. Well, as a civic education teacher, I wanted to figure out a way to engage my students, and through my students, I wanted to engage the parents in voting. So I went to the League of Women Voters. This was pre-internet days, and I got copies, printed out copies of the League of Women Voters summaries of the pros and cons of each of the ballot initiatives. I brought those summaries to school, and I gave every student in my classes a copy to take home. And then I told my students, if they went to the polls with someone in their family who was able to vote, or maybe it was a neighbor who was able to vote, and they came to class with an I voted sticker, I would give them 5 bonus points on the next test. What's your big idea? Put it in the chat. How can you support and encourage people in your neighborhood to get engaged in the election as we consider all of these issues and candidates that are going to make a huge impact on our communities in the years moving forward? Thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. I think that there are a few questions in the chat, and I will rely on Michael to help us sort through those. And in the meantime, I hope you will also put your suggestions in the chat for everybody to see. Great. I love it. Rides for folks with transportation challenges, signs, volunteering at the polls. And yes, there are absolutely more than 2 parties, and that can particularly come into play in local elections, typically less so in national elections, but sometimes in national elections as well. A question about working for nonprofits and restrictions on lobbying. So that's a great question. Thank you for asking the question. And one thing that is important to remember, the restrictions on lobbying apply to nonprofit organizations and people working in their official capacity for nonprofit organizations. If you are somebody who is employed by the federal government, by state or local government, you might also have restrictions on what you can do in your official capacity. Those limitations do not apply to what you do in your personal time. So when you're not working, you can, on the weekends, knock on doors. You can send emails from your personal email address, but not your work email address. The protections for political speech and political activities in this country are very strong as long as you are working in an unofficial capacity. And if you work for a nonprofit or a government entity, you are limited in what you can do on the clock as part of your job, and using the resources, the email addresses, the telephone number, the letterhead, the logos of your organization. But you can do any kind of advocacy in your personal time that you choose to do. Other questions in the chat? And again, I'm looking to our Touchpoints colleagues to help as I scroll through to see what other questions are in the chat. I love all of these suggestions. Thank you. The Neighborhood Leader Program, I love it. And election ambassadors, that's wonderful. And just as a reminder, the webinar is being recorded, and this recording, as well as the other advocacy webinars that we've done over the last 2 years, are all going to be available, are now available, or this one will be available on the Touchpoints YouTube channel. And the slides obviously will be available in the recording. I love the idea of writing newspaper articles or the equivalent of an opinion piece and having them published in the newspaper. In particular, local papers are really looking for contributors. I love the creation of a social media page, free community events to help people sign up to vote. I love it. Thank you. Thank you all for everything that you do to be engaged in your community, advocating for the issues and the people that you care about. And thank you for all that you do to engage others in that effort. We look forward to hearing more about what you do between now and November. And yay, Head Start class and voting. And the kids went home excited about voting and encouraging their parents to vote. I love engaging the kids. It's never too early to start. Thank you all and have a good